Hey everyone, I'm trying something new this week. I'm going to release a video every day recounting incredible stories involving animals. Today, we're looking at the story of Harry the Camel and the man that he was held responsible for murdering. Welcome back to All.About.Nature. On my channel, I try to bring nature-related content that's both educational and entertaining. If you want to come back to hear the rest of the stories this week, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon for notifications. Now let's take a look at the story of Harry. When Europeans first set foot on Australian soil, they were met by a land teeming with wildlife, unlike anything they had seen before. These species were highly adapted to life on this unique island. The Aboriginal peoples of Australia were also highly adapted to life in the arid landscape, having found ways to survive in some of the most inhospitable environments for thousands of years. In order to navigate this land, the Europeans used the animal that they knew and trusted: horses. That is, until they realized that horses die rather quickly in the deserts of Australia. As a result, European settlement was focused along the coasts until the mid-1800s, when someone got an idea. In order to navigate through the arid interior, an animal specifically adapted to that environment was needed, and camels were an obvious choice. The first record we have of a European mentioning the idea of using camels is from 1822, from the French-Danish journalist and geographer Conrad Malte-Brun. In his work titled Universal Geography, or A Description of All Parts of the World on a New Plan According to the Great Natural Divisions of the Globe, Malte-Brun writes, "For such an expedition, men of science and courage ought to be selected. They ought to be provided with all sorts of implements and stores, and with different animals, from the powers and instincts of which they may derive assistance. They should have oxen from Buenos Aires, or from the English settlements, mules from Senegal, and dromedaries from Africa or Arabia. The oxen would traverse the woods and the thickets. The mules would walk securely among rugged rocks and hilly countries. The dromedaries would cross the sandy deserts. Thus, the expedition would be prepared for any kind of territory that the interior might present." In 1839, the second governor of South Australia agreed, and the following year, the Phillips brothers of Adelaide sent for dromedary camels that were being kept on the Canary Islands. Several camels were loaded onto a ship and sent off, but the journey was incredibly long and arduous. On the voyage, all but one of the camels died. But that single camel that survived the journey was the first camel to ever set foot on Australian soil. The camel was named Harry, and he lived a quiet life in Adelaide, adapting to his new home for nearly 6 years. But in July of 1846, Harry began a journey that would lead to the ending of his life. John Ainsworth Horrocks was planning an expedition to explore the country north of Spencer Gulf. He was looking for land that would be suited for farming herds of animals. After other colonists funded his expedition, Horrocks felt that something was still missing. He wanted a camel. So, he traded 6 of his cattle to acquire Harry and brought him to Penwortham, the village where he lived, which was also founded by himself and by his brother. The expedition had 6 men: Horrocks, who would lead the expedition; John Henry Teaxon, who was second in command; Bernard Kilroy, who would act as both driver and cook; Samuel Thomas Gill, who was an artist and was brought along to paint the landscapes that they came across. There was also a man named Mr. Garlick. And finally, Jimmy Morehouse, an Aboriginal man who was brought along to herd the 12 goats that they used for sustenance. The expedition also included 2 carts, 6 horses, and of course, Harry the Camel. The party set off on the 29th of July and made their way to Mount Remarkable, then on to Mount Arden, where they established camp at Air Depot Creek. The group were already a month into their expedition, and they were becoming quite familiar with the pros and cons of having Harry along for the trip. Harry was exactly what they were hoping for from a camel. He could carry heavy equipment for long periods of time through the rough terrain, being able to go as much as 2 days without drinking. But Harry was also really bad-tempered. He regularly bit the men and the goats whenever they were within range. At the end of August, 3 of the men from the party, Expedition Leader Horrocks, Artist Gill, and Cook Kilroy, set out from the camp at Air Depot Creek to explore some of the land nearby. They traveled 65 miles northwest, where they came across a lake which they named Lake Gill, and today is known as Lake Dutton. Sometime around September 4th, the men were walking around the lake when something extraordinary happened. Horrocks recounted the events in a letter he wrote shortly after. In going around this lake, which I named Lake Gill, Kilroy, who was walking ahead of the party, stopped, saying he saw a beautiful bird, which he recommended me to shoot to add to the collection. My gun being loaded with slugs in one barrel and ball in the other, I stopped the camel to get at the shot belt, which I could not get without his laying down. Whilst Mr. Gill was unfastening it, I was screwing the ramrod into the wad over the slugs, standing close alongside of the camel. At this moment, the camel gave a lurch to one side and caught his pack on the lock of my gun, which discharged the barrel I was unloading, the contents of which first took off the middle finger of my right hand between the second and third joints, and entered my left cheek by my lower jaw, knocking out a row of teeth from my upper jaw. This horrific accident stopped the expedition immediately. Despite being 65 miles from their comrades, the 3 men made it back to their camp in only 24 hours, where they rested for 5 days. But Horrocks' injuries were serious, and infection was setting in. So on September 10th, the party began their journey back to Penwortham. Most of the party had to move slowly due to the amount of cargo and livestock that needed to be moved, so Kilroy rode ahead with Horrocks. They arrived in Penwortham 9 days later on September 19th, over 2 weeks after the injury, and a Dr. Nolt from Adelaide was summoned to try to help save Horrocks' life. But by the time the doctor got there, the infection was serious. It was determined that it was beyond treatment, and the doctor informed Horrocks that this was going to be the end of his life. But Horrocks wasn't going to go without finding some sort of justice. Soon, the rest of the party arrived in Penwortham, and Horrocks handed down his sentence. For his crimes of biting people and animals, and for his role in shooting the gun, Harry was to suffer the same fate as Horrocks, and be shot and killed. The station hands went and got Harry to take him out for his punishment, but he wasn't going to go easily. As they readied him to be shot, an Aboriginal stockman was bitten on the head by Harry in a final act of defiance. Then, Harry was put down. With Harry's death, there were no more camels in Australia, but 16 years later a new wave of camels would make it to the continent, leading to them eventually being released and establishing a feral population in Australia that's now over 1 million strong. John Ainsworth Horrocks was only 28 when he died, and he became known as the man who was shot by his camel. But he had a lasting legacy in southern Australia. He pioneered interior exploration using camels, and later had several geographical features and roads named after him, including Horrocks Pass, Mount Horrocks, and Horrocks Highway. And that's it for today's video. Come back tomorrow to hear the story of the crane that fell in love with a man. I want to say a special thanks to my patrons, whose support makes this channel possible. If you want to join us on Patreon, check out the link in the video description below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.